Should I get an autism or ADHD diagnosis at my age? Hi, I'm Brett. I'm the AuDHD Boss. I'm an autistic manager with ADHD. And on this channel, we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I have over 10 years of leadership training and experience. I talk a lot about being late diagnosed on this channel. And one of the most frequently asked questions that I've gotten on some of my videos is, should I pursue getting an autism or ADHD diagnosis? So I wanted to make a video to sort of address this question since it does come up a lot. And I want to preface everything that I'm about to say, but with a couple of very important things. I am not a medical professional. I cannot diagnose you, and I can only share my personal experience and my personal knowledge with getting my late diagnosis to help put that information out there. And if that helps you, that's great. All that being said, when it comes to whether or not you should get a diagnosis, I can't actually answer that question for you. But what I can do is give you some questions to think about and some questions to process to figure out if that's the right decision for you. And these are the questions that I sat with for myself when I went through this process to figure out if I should or shouldn't get a diagnosis. Specifically, since this is a channel about workplace neurodivergence, for me, the situation came down to I felt like I was in a place where I probably needed an accommodation. And so at that point in my life, I felt that I needed to have a formal diagnosis of ADHD and or autism so that if I had a reason to have that accommodation request made, I had the diagnosis ready to go. I got my diagnosis. I started to learn everything that I needed to learn about the diagnosis process and everything that I needed to know about existing in the world. I found a therapist who could start helping me work my way through that. And soon I was able to get to a place where I was making self-accommodations and I was okay for a while. But then some things changed. And as I learned more or I discovered new things that I was struggling with that maybe weren't struggles I was able to name before, I found myself in a place thinking, well, you know what? I actually do need an accommodation. Some things had changed in my role and there were different expectations, and I was really struggling to get through the workload that I had at that time. And so I decided to ask for an accommodation. Now, in the end, it turned out my accommodations were so reasonable that I didn't actually need a formal accommodation. I was able to work out the accommodation between my boss and myself, and those accommodations continue to hold, and we have a really good working relationship. And I was very lucky and privileged in that situation to have things work out that way. But that's the second thing. A lot of accommodations, because they are based on the idea of a reasonable accommodation, a reasonable manager is probably going to be okay with a lot of your accommodation requests without you having to confide. These are what I call gentle accommodations or soft accommodations, where you are putting forward a gentle or reasonable request for how you need to be more successful in your job or more successful in the workplace. And most managers will reasonably go, oh, okay, if that's what you need to be successful in your job, yeah, we can do that. We can figure out a way to make it happen. A lot of times it's just framing the question in the sense of, hey, would it be possible for us to do something like this so that I can be more effective in my role or more effective in my job? Or doing something like this will help me be able to do more of the work that I need to do every day and to do it better and more efficiently. Is something like that possible? Most managers will agree, yes. You can ask that without ever having to share or confide your diagnosis or your diagnosis status. If they say no, then that's up to you at that point to decide, okay, is that no more difficult for me or creating another barrier for me that I do need to go ask for a formal accommodation, in which case you may want to have a formal diagnosis at that point. But when we think about whether or not, or at least for me, when I thought about whether or not I needed to get a formal diagnosis, and I want to also state, I believe firmly that a self-diagnosis is valid because a formal diagnosis can be expensive. That's one of the factors we have to consider when we talk about whether or not getting a formal diagnosis is possible for people. In many cases, there's a long waiting list. In some cases, they're too expensive. People don't have the insurance for it, or even with insurance, there's still significant costs because every insurance company is going to be slightly different in how they do it. And now there's the added risk, if you live in the United States, of concern that people are having with the state of things about whether or not your name will be put on a list. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of nervousness about that, especially for a late diagnosed individual. So in my instance, I was able to decide who I share that diagnosis with. I did not give it to my general practitioner. I did not give it to anybody else. It was my decision to decide. And it continues to be. Like, my other medical professionals that I see regularly They don't have it in their files. They don't know that I have it. I was given my autistic diagnosis, and that was that. I was able to kind of control that. Now, is it possible that that information could be shared? Of course, possibly. It absolutely is, and I'm prepared for that. But again, it continues to be what was best for me in that moment and continues to be what's best for me now. And for me, I believe getting that diagnosis was really helpful. The other thing I'll note here is they are not in any way, shape, or form a sponsor of this video, but I do highly like Embrace Autism, who are based in Canada. They do have a lot of transparency about their pricing structure, and I find that their pricing structure, while still a higher price tag for people to access, is more reasonably priced for a diagnosis process than it is for a lot of other American or domestic diagnoses processes. So if that's something that you would consider, I'll put a link in the description. I would advise going to check that out and seeing if their pricing structure works for you. They're open and transparent about the entire system, how they do the diagnosis process. They even offer all of the free diagnosis tools on their website for you to do self-diagnosis for yourself if you don't want to get the formal diagnosis through them. And that's what it kind of comes down to is, are there any situations in your life? Are there any relationships? Are there any instances? Are there things that are happening in your life that put you in a position where maybe having a diagnosis could help you through those relationships, those situations, those barriers, whatever they are? I always try to take a strengths-based approach to all of the content that I do on this channel. So even through those barriers, I try to find a way that I have a strength in me to find an alternative way around those barriers. But having the diagnosis for me even helped me figure that out, because once I had the diagnosis explained to me, it turned out there were a lot of things I didn't know about. I didn't know I had a nonverbal learning disability. I didn't know I had other learning disabilities. I didn't know much about my OCD until I had the formal diagnosis, and all those things were then explained to me. Having that information available to me gave me more opportunities for more resources and to more learning and to ask more questions and gain more knowledge. Comorbidities, so that I could understand how the autism, the ADHD, the OCD, the learning disability, how they all sort of work together. And even now, I'm still learning a lot about all of those things, which I wouldn't have benefited from knowing without a formal diagnosis. However, knowing what I knew at the time of self-diagnosis, I probably would have been able to create accommodations for myself with the things that I did know. What are the situations that you're facing, that you're struggling with, that a diagnosis would or would not help you with? And those are the questions you want to sit with as you try to figure out whether or not getting a formal diagnosis is right for you. Everyone's situation is going to be different. As we always say, if you've met one person with autism, you've literally met that one person with that version of autism that is there for them. Autism is going to show up differently for everybody. ADHD is going to show up differently for everybody because we're all unique individuals. So everyone's needs and assessments are going to be slightly different based on their personal situation. So reflect on your personal situation. For me, I needed to take some time doing some processing, but it got to a place for me where I really, really, really needed to know, and I really wanted to know. I wanted to know, and I had certain situations in my life that an accommodation request would have made sense. So having the diagnosis allowed me to make that formal request, which in the end I didn't need, but it allowed me the opportunity to have it. I hope some of that information has been helpful. It's very unique to my situation, so my situation may not be the same as everybody else's. It may look very different from your situation. If that was helpful for you, please check out some of the other videos while you're here on the channel. Let me know if you have a question that you would like for me to talk more about ADHD or autism in the workplace, or if you just have general questions about manager and employee relationships or leadership things or anything about neurodivergence in the workplace. And be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And please check out some of the other videos while you're here. Thanks for watching.